No one else in the world has an aircraft carrier battle group. I mean, one American aircraft battle group is nearly as powerful as the combined navies of the rest of the planet. So it's not like anyone can just go and impose a new reality just because they're there. That, and they're not all going to be on the same side. So you'll get 3, 4, 5 different powers in the same naval footprint trying to take control of whatever oil or take delivery of whatever oil they possibly can while the two oil producers are shooting at one another. This is, in a word, messy. And there is no way there is going to be enough crude for everybody in a world where the United States is not maintaining the security situation. Yeah, because on both sides, a primary target will be the oil production of the other side. I mean, it's just kind of a obvious situation. You take out the other side's economic lifeline. Sure. Well, the U.S. Midwest is the greatest agricultural basin in the world. Not only is it arable, not only is it in the temperate zone, it takes moisture from two different systems. From west to east, you've got the jet stream. And while the jet stream moves from year to year, and sometimes you have drought years and sometimes flood years, it's not alone. You also have the Gulf system that sends tropical moisture that, of course, Texans know as hurricanes. But by the time you get to Iowa and Kansas, it's just rain. It's pretty rare for an agricultural basin to have two different precipitation systems, kind of a monsoonal boost and then a more regular system. You throw in a winter insect kill, and that means you force soil decomposition upon the land. You kill all the bugs, you kill all the weeds. It's kind of free fertilizer and herbicide. The Chinese don't have anything like that. All of China only has a single moisture source. Northern China is remarkably thin soils, and it's backed by a desert, so you get droughts followed by floods pretty regularly. You go further south in the country, you get rugged terrain where agriculture is a lot more difficult and the costs of input are higher. But if you want to bring this to the modern era, with the shale revolution, the United States is a net exporter of all the things that agriculturalists need. Fuel, pesticides, herbicides, the entire chemical suite. China is an importer of all of it because it has to be. It doesn't have the energy production. It imports the vast majority of their fuels. It imports all of the raw commodities that go into a fertilizer industry. So without trade, you've got to look at what fertilizers and chemical pesticides and things like them have done for us. When the world industrialized for the first time back in the late 1800s, we saw per acre output of foodstuff increase by a factor of 4 because of these new additives. Well, it doesn't take a genius to say that when you take these additives away, we're going to see something moving in the opposite direction. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have a hard 80% collapse, but let's say it only goes down by half. That's a hell of a population correction. It really depends upon inputs. One of the things to keep in mind about China's financial model is that it's not profit-driven, it's outcome-driven, usually political. So they will print a lot of currency and they will throw whatever possible financial resources they need in order to force the output that they need. And so they over-fertilize, they over-pesticide, and so on. Overall, and it really depends upon which crop you're talking about inputs that are about 5 times the volume of what we use in the United States. Well, spoiler alert, not well. The Chinese Communist Party has known a lot of these problems were coming for the last 25 years. And every time they thought they had a moment to kind of breathe, they've put in a small-scale reform program to try to make the system work a little bit better, but it has always generated political backlash. And since ultimately their entire financial and agricultural system is geared towards political outcomes, they immediately backed away. So the distortions have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. At the same time, their international exposure has gotten more and more and more, and their demographic situation has gotten worse and worse and worse. So we really are well past the point of no return. At the same time all that has happened, the folks at the top of the political party have realized that they're gunning for a real political crisis. And since they didn't think that economic reforms would get them to where they needed to, they decided to go the other direction and politically centralize everything and basically make their next premier the equivalent of one of the Chinese emperors of old, and that is Chairman Xi. Well, we're now in a situation where Xi has consolidated more power unto himself than any Chinese leader in history, more than Mao, more than the emperors of old, which means today, when anything goes wrong, it's Xi's fault. And with the coronavirus outbreak, we are starting to see more than merely whispers, but a rising tide of discontent as the average Chinese citizen is starting to place blame on the party itself and at the person at the top. And when political systems like where the CCP is today start to experience that sort of criticism, they do not get softer. So I think a more ossified, a more brittle, a harsher future is in immediate store for the Chinese Communist Party, which means that when this breaks, the Chinese Communist Party is going to drive this system into the ground in an attempt to eke out every last little bit of time and power that they possibly can. If you had asked me 5-10 years ago, I would have said that the Chinese have a chance to reform this. They've now conclusively made the decision that reform is not the path, and they are going to utterly destroy their country in an attempt to maintain power. Well, from the Chinese point of view, that's exactly what's happening. They've steadily built up these tools for citizen surveillance. They're trying to convince people that you don't necessarily have to have an economic improvement in order to give your loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party. Just being Chinese is enough. That works for a while until you, of course, have a nationalist defeat like the virus is handing them right now. But that's only one way that this can go down. Like, we know that they will never reach a consumption-based model because the one-child policy has removed the consumers. That also means that we know that they're becoming ever more economically unviable because their workforce is aging, and so it's becoming more expensive, and they're already experiencing labor shortages. That's another way that this can go down. You can have a shock in the Middle East, which generates an energy crisis, and they import about 80% of their energy. That's another way that this can go down. The Americans could just leave one day and the export industry collapses. That's another way that this could go down. The Japanese could wake up on the wrong side of the bed, scream bonsai, and shut the whole thing down. That's another way that this could go down. The problem with predicting the specifics of China's future is that every pillar that they have used to base their entire modern civilization on is beyond their control. And they're all cracking at the same time, and any one of them is lethal. Responses to the degree that they would feel that they need a dry run, their general opinion of their own people when it comes to thinking of them as normal. You got to remember that the political history of the West is starkly different, and between the Renaissance and the Awakenings and all that, we actually value what individuals think, whereas the Chinese are much more community-oriented. There are pros and there are cons to that, but I don't think that the Chinese have ever been really concerned about implementing a new technology at the state level just to see what the impact is going to be. They've got a goal in mind. They've got some tools. They apply it. That's definitely what they're doing with facial recognition. From a political and military point of view, for most, the concern is too big. Americans are remarkably self-absorbed, particularly in times of retrenchment like we're in right now. So it would have to get really bad and it would have to cross the Pacific for us to honestly even really notice. Japan would see it as cause for celebration, and they're an island nation. They'd be fine. The Southeast Asians in general and the Australians in particular, they definitely take some hits because China is just this great sucking maw for their exports. But ultimately, Southeast Asia has a